Heidi and I are very happy to have a very special friend of ours, Dr. Howard Winokuer, on. And Heidi's going to be introducing Dr. Winokuer and me. Go ahead, Heidi.
Hi, Glo, Howard, and everybody that's listening. Yes, these are our photos. The ones, obviously, the three of us. There's Howard in the middle. Gloria's got the pink, outfit on, and I'm the one in black. And Howard's next to me as well, by himself. So I'm very excited to have Howard on today, and I'm honored to introduce him because Howard is an international leader in the field of grief and loss. He is past president of ADAC, which is the Association for Death Educators and Counselors, and this is where I met him. He's a licensed professional counselor, a fellow in thanatology, and an adjunct faculty member at numerous colleges and universities. He's world-renowned, and he's just recently edited a groundbreaking book, which he can tell us about. So he will be talking more today about how do I know if it's grief or depression. Welcome, Howard.
I guess that's me.
That is you. You're on, baby.
Heidi had mentioned our new book, Grief and Bereavement in Contemporary Society, Bridging Research and Practice. This is actually a groundbreaking book in the field of dealing with grief and bereavement. If you look at grief, let's take a look at just the definition. Grief is the intrapersonal experience of dealing with a loss. Now, this is an important concept, intrapersonal. That means all of the feelings and emotions that we experience within ourselves. Obviously, it touches all lives. It's a normal human experience. And grieving persons are experiencing, and this is really the difference about depression and grief. And grieving persons are experiencing a situational crisis. That's a key word there, situational crisis, which impacts their lives in all of its dimensions. Now, I want to make a distinction, and if you would please move to the next slide. Grief and depression are not necessarily separate. Depression, and I want to make this clear, and this is a definition, also known as a major depressive disorder, is a serious medical condition that can impact the way you feel and act towards others. Many people with depression feel that life is no longer worth living. They may feel hopeless, like there's no way out. So here's the first distinction I want to make, and it's funny. I go back to a concept that I learned in geometry, and I'm still not sure if I understand it, but the concept was a square is a rhombus, but a rhombus isn't a square. Now, what does that really mean? I think as it relates to this, what it means is that depression is part of grief, but grief may not be part of a clinical depression. Clinical depressions are very difficult, and I want to make a distinction. As you noticed in the slide before, I mentioned situational depression. There's a big difference between situational depression and clinical depression. Actually, in working with our clients, and Heidi, you could probably talk to this as well, that situational depression is much easier for us to work with than clinical depression. With clinical depression, we rarely know what the cause of the depression is. We know all the feelings and emotions associated with it, but we have no clue what the trigger was. And for many people, we literally have to go back and help them dig deeply through their past to help them understand where the cause of the depression is coming from. However, with situational depression, and this is often related to any grief or experience, like death, divorce, getting older, that we understand where the depression is coming from, and so it's a little bit easier in helping people begin to work through this process because we know where it comes from.
Well, and I was going to say one more thing, Howard. I mean, for those listening, ask yourselves out there, how were we feeling before the loss? I mean, if I was feeling fine, I'm thinking of myself with my brother. Before Scott died, I was fine. I was in a good space. After he died, I felt like I was very depressed. But like you said, it was situational. It was because he was no longer here.
That's right. So you weren't depressed before Scott died.
Right.
Right.
But I felt like I was after because I didn't realize that what I was going through was grief.
Yeah,
Gloria?
that gets me into a question here. We've got a question from somebody named Terry who said, I was on antidepressants years ago, and 6 months ago my 90-year-old mother died. She was in hospice for her last months, and I took care of her. I'm really scared that I'm slipping back into that dark place again. Any suggestions? So here's somebody who was depressed before, years ago.
Well, the first thing I would say, Terry, is, and let me back up. I will tell you, many years ago, I was pretty much anti-taking medication. But when people are often depressed, I no longer feel that way. I have seen how really effective antidepressants can be in helping someone. Now, this is a soapbox issue for me, so I want to own it, but it's really important. I think it's fine to be in therapy without taking medication. However, I don't think it's okay to be taking medication without being in therapy. Now, you might ask, why do I say that? But the point is, the medication might help take away some of the symptoms of the depression, but it doesn't do anything to address what's going on in your life that's leading you to be taking the medication.
It sounds like, yeah, it sounds like the advice to Terry might be, she was on antidepressants years ago. It sounds like she needs to go into a therapist and talk about this, somebody who knows something about grief and loss, so she can work with her mother, but also she's afraid she's slipping back into that dark place again. That's a dark place for people.
Well, it is a dark place, and you know, one of the things I remember one time, and I'm not saying this because I think anybody needs to go to a psychiatric hospital, but there used to be a national psychiatric chain that had wonderful ads they ran on TV, and the tagline for one of their ads has stayed with me for many years, and I think it's wonderful. It says that only the strong know when to ask for help.
That's great. Well, let's move to our next slide on that note. So
Okay.
I know you've got a lot more information. That's a great note. So do you just want to talk about it, and then we'll move on, Howard, to the next one?
Yeah, well, let's go to the next slide, and let's take a look. And how do I know if it's grief or depression? Here are some of the symptoms of depression. And one is depressed mood most of the day, feeling sad, empty, or tearful. A significant loss of interest or pleasure in activities that you used to find enjoyable. Significant weight loss when not dieting, or weight gain. So a decrease or increase in appetite, and difficult in sleeping or sleeping too much. Now, again, what you need to understand that these are signs of depression, but because depression is also included in grief, these are also things that you would experience when you were grieving the death of someone you love significantly. You might feel depressed most of the day. You might not have interest in things that were enjoyable to you. You might put weight on or lose weight. I remember a speaker I heard one time. Her name is Ann Kaiser Stern. She wrote a very, very good book called Living Through Personal Crisis. And I remember her saying she always knew when she was having a hard time when she found herself living in her refrigerator.
That's a good one, yeah.
And then in terms of sleeping, we see three typical sleep-related problems. Some people can't fall asleep. Some people sleep all the time. And then there's a third that I'm sure many of our listeners have experienced, that they go to sleep and they sleep for an hour or two, and then they wake up and then they can't sleep anymore.
You know, one of the things that can cause that too is alcohol. People think if they have a glass of wine when they go to bed at night, it might make them feel better. It does put you to sleep, but you do wake up early.
And if you wake up early, you're not getting a really restful sleep. So I think that's a good point. Would you go to the next slide, please?
You know, while we're going to the next slide, we've got another we just got an email from Mary, and we hope that you'll feel free to give us questions during this, and people certainly are. Mary said, regarding weight gain, I gained 30 pounds since I lost my 7-year-old daughter to leukemia. I am embarrassed to go out. It's been 2 years. Do you have any thoughts?
That's a hard one, Mary. Again, I think having someone to talk to about the death, was it her daughter?
Yeah.
Gloria?
Yeah,
Mary,
7-year-old daughter to leukemia.
having someone to talk to about the death of your daughter, and beginning, hopefully to deal with the grief and the sadness and the pain. The weight you've gained is only temporary. As you begin to heal, you could also take the weight off.
Yeah, I think this embarrassed to go out too. I think that isolation with grief can be a real problem.
Sure, because if you're isolating yourself, then basically you're removing yourself from any support systems or support network that could be helpful. That's why the Open to Hope Foundation and the work they do and all of the resources they have online are so wonderful, so that until you're ready to begin reaching out, you can reach out through Open to Hope in cyberspace and begin to get support that you need. But
and I would like to say something else to Mary. This is Heidi, by the way. Try not to be too hard on yourself about this, because it's very normal after a loss, like Howard was saying, to either lose or gain weight. And I'm always telling my clients, sometimes when someone that we love has died, we need comfort food temporarily, and that's something that at that point we need. And maybe right now she's ready to kind of move into a different part of her grief journey. And one of the things I would just say is try not to be too hard on yourself about that. You needed that at the time, and now you're ready to move on and do some of these other things that we've talked about.
And I think that's a great piece of suggestion, Heidi, that it's really important, Mary. You've had enough hard things happen to you with your daughter's death. Would she really want you to be hard on yourself? Would your daughter want you to be suffering for the rest of your life? Or would she encourage you and say, Mom, I want you to try to still live a full and meaningful life, always remembering me, but understanding that you need to continue on. I mean, Gloria, you can talk about what that was like for you surviving Scott's death.
Right. Yeah. It's a tough journey. She's only been 2 years, and I'd say to you, Mary, this is amazing that you're reaching out and telling us this. That you're embarrassed to go out, even doing it in cyberspace. I think it's your first step. I think you're on your way.
And Mary, I'm not sure where you're living, but I can tell you both Heidi and Gloria are both very involved on a local and national level of an organization called the Compassionate Friends. This is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful organization that is made up of many parents who have had a child die and brothers and sisters who have also had siblings die. And this might be a very safe place if you have a Compassionate Friends chapter in your community to begin reaching out.
Right. I'm just looking at this slide you've got up now, because these feelings of worthlessness and self-hate and inappropriate guilt, I was thinking, you always said that, Heidi, that if it's loss, and depression, you feel worthless when you've had a loss, a death.
Absolutely. I mean, if someone said to me after Scott died, do you feel like a worthless person, I wouldn't have really understood what they meant by that question. Because, and I think that's really telling. I mean, you don't feel worthless usually after a loss. At least that hasn't been my experience, or those of the people that I've known.
Right.
And then this whole issue of guilt. Guilt is something that, interestingly enough, usually comes from one of two places for many people. And Heidi and Gloria, you may have seen this with people you've talked to. But my experience is it comes from either people who have done things that they wish they hadn't, or didn't do things that they wish they had.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they've done things that they wish they hadn't, it's really very difficult and easy for them to be very hard on themselves and develop self-hatred. And feelings of worthlessness, like Heidi was just talking about, if people don't believe that they have any reason to continue. If you look at above the worthlessness, it talks about hopelessness and helplessness. If people don't have a sense that they can continue on in their life, or ask themselves, why are they living? Is it worth living? Then thoughts of death and suicide, unfortunately, come into their lives. And
there are some I think the difference between grief and depression and the thoughts of wanting to join the other, you know, sometimes you just wish you were with them because it's so painful, but you really don't have a plan. You really, you know, it's not like a suicide thing. It's just like, I miss them so much. You know, I wish I could be with them. So, and some people get very nervous about their family members who maybe say, I wish I were with them, you know, but it's not really a suicide thought. It's a thought of, I miss them. So a little difference there. So going on to the next slide, we're going to hear the signs of the symptoms of depression, and we're going to hear the symptoms of grief next.
Well, let's take a look and see what we have coming up.
All right.
Do we have the next slide coming?
Yeah, Heather. Oh, there we go. Okay.
All right, so under symptoms of grief, I try to break it down into a number of different areas. The main goal I have in our talking about this today is the understanding of what's normal. Because typically, and I'm sure you all have heard this too, two things clients ask me quite frequently, and I think they're two sides of the same question. When someone's experienced a significant loss or the death of someone they love, things seem to be so out of control. The two questions they ask are, one, are all these things I'm experiencing normal? And on the other side of the question, they want to know, because they're experiencing all this, am I going crazy? Well, the way I answer that is two ways. In terms of question one, almost everything you are experiencing is normal. And under question two, you're not going crazy. So in looking at these symptoms,
I like that, Howard.
Well, thank you. I'll have to remember that. I've recorded that so I can play that back sometime. So if you look here at the current slide, these are normal symptoms on a physical level of dealing with grief. There's anxiety and heart palpitations, health concerns, dry mouth, lack of energy, a tightness in your chest or throat, depersonalization, not wanting to be involved with people, muscle weakness, weight gain and loss, overreaction to loud noises, searching, breathlessness, hollowness in stomach, sexual hypersexuality, loss of sexual desire, treasuring objects that belong to our loved one, physical pain, anorexia and not eating, and gastrointestinal disturbances.
Okay,
Again,
now I've got a question for you when you're ready. Someone just sent it in.
Sure.
It's from Barry, and he says loss of sexual desire is really a big issue for my wife and me. She has virtually ignored me since we had a stillbirth 3 months ago. Do you have any suggestions? I know some guys out there would have an affair. Wow.
That's a very, very difficult question, Barry, to answer. I think the hard part to understand is first that your wife just gave birth to a stillbirth baby 3 months ago. So it's not only the death of her child and your child that's so hard to deal with, but when a child dies, it's often, as we see it, the death of our future. And I think you need to give your wife permission to heal. Now, I think this is a very difficult thing, Barry, for her to do by herself. And I would really encourage her to get some counseling, or the two of you to get some family counseling, to work on your grief and work on the pain, so that hopefully the two of you can reconnect as a couple and have the kind of marriage that you still hope that you would like to have.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I'd recommend too, in talking to women, they sometimes say that the men approach them a little too aggressively. I mean, they really would just like an arm around them for a while, and maybe Barry's already tried that, but if you haven't, try taking a kind of softer approach to the whole thing, and try to maybe do some dating, or take her to dinner, or, you know, buy some flowers, or and then not expect anything in return for a while, as far as, you know, maybe actually having physical contact with her, you know, having sex may be late. But a lot of guys are saying, when will it be, and you know, that kind of thing. But I think that working up to it
I agree with you, Mom. I think that's good advice. Like having intimacy and romance in your relationship, and just kind of, you know, those kind of things first. And then, like you said, hopefully working up to that.
I agree with you as well. It's interesting. I've worked with many, many widows over the course of my professional career. And it's interesting, and Barry, this is an important thing to hear. Most women will tell you when their husband dies, it's not sex that they miss the most. What they miss the most are the sense of intimacy, those touches, those hands around your shoulder, a kiss on the cheek. So I think what Gloria and Heidi are saying is right on target, that people really, really, really just want to be loved, and that the sex right now, if you can control your need for it, I think you can begin developing some building blocks to help re-engage in your marriage. All right, well, let's move on to the next symptom of grief.
You know, I'll just do another email while we're moving on, because we just got another one from someone named Taylor. You can move on with the slide, and we'll take Taylor's while it's moving on. Taylor says, guilt is a big issue for me. I cannot forget that I was driving the car when my daughter was killed. People keep telling me that it wasn't my fault, but I keep reliving the accident. Oh, and we're coming up to some guilt here.
Well, that's another very, very difficult one. You know, people will tell you all kinds of things, but even if it's true, because you're perceiving it that way, that's the truth that you have to deal with, Taylor. So again, I'm such a strong believer that only the strong know when to ask for help. And I would really encourage you to see if you can find somebody who is trained in dealing with issues around grief and loss, and especially the death of a child, to be a resource to you and a support to you to help you work through the terrible, terrible pain of having your daughter die.
All right, and another one, Howard, we're moving right along here. It's from Diane, and she says, I am having a difficult time since I lost my 26-year-old son to leukemia. I have had all of these symptoms for a while now. And it must be all the symptoms that we were talking about, probably. Yeah, sleep disturbance. She's had all these symptoms. How long should a person feel this way, and what length of time should pass before seeking help? I want my old life back. Is this depression?
Well, I think that when we're moving into the 2 or 3 year realm, if you haven't sought help, and you find yourself still experiencing all these same symptoms, I would say that the depression from the grief is now leading into a deeper depression, Diane. And if you have someone in your community that you trust, or do some research and find someone that you think could be helpful, I think this would be a good time to begin searching for some help so that you can reclaim your life.
And she doesn't say exactly how long it was. I'll tell you something. I hate to say it, but it takes a long time to you know, deal with these things. I'm talking about years. With
I mean, if someone was your son for 26 years, why would you expect to be over it in months or a year or 2 years? Yeah, I mean, that's all.
Yeah, I would suggest, again, like Howard said, you go to Compassionate Friends or get in an organization where you can be with other people who've had a similar loss, because you can talk to them and they can kind of give you a reality check, because they can say, you can hear how long it's been for them and how they're doing, and you kind of can find out where you stand in the realm. Some people don't want to go because they don't want to hear what has happened with other people. But if you give it, say, 3 times going to a group, you might find out you get some benefits from that.
I agree with you, Mom, and it normalizes a lot of what you're going through. And I would say that for Taylor as well. I mean, here Taylor was driving the car and her child died. Well, that's Pat Loder's story. She was driving she's the executive director for Compassionate Friends. She was driving the car and both of her children died. So being around other parents that have had similar experiences is very healing. And you know that you're not alone, and others have been where you've been. And it's really an amazing thing. So I agree.
I think you're right on target. That last statement, understanding that you're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
There was something that was on the previous slide under emotional that I wanted to just go back to, and that has to deal with anger towards God. That's a very, very common experience for so many people. And for those of us who are supporting someone who's grieving and we hear someone being angry with God, I want to tell you a story I learned when I first began doing this work, and I was doing some pastoral care training. And Chaplain Wilkinson, who was a retiring 76-year-old Presbyterian minister, said something that has stayed with me for almost 40 years now. He said, allow people to be angry with God because God is strong enough to handle our anger.
Right, absolutely. Well, we've got to move on to another question here. It's from Judith, and she said, I was put on antidepressants after my son died 6 months ago. It hasn't taken away the grief. Wow. Yeah.
Well, remember what I said, Judith, that antidepressants may take away some of the symptoms, but they don't take away the grief. Remember I said it's fine to be in counseling without medication, but I don't believe it's okay to take medication without counseling. You need to have someone to talk to or a group to be part of so you can begin sharing. I want to go back to something. I talked about grief before, but I want to mention something else, and it's the concept of mourning. Now, I used to think that grief and mourning were the same things, but they're not. Grief, as I said at the beginning, is the intrapersonal experience of all the feelings and emotions that we have within ourselves when we experience a death or a loss. Mourning is the interpersonal experience of sharing that story, sharing that pain with someone. And in order for us to heal, we need not only to grieve, but we need to grieve and to mourn. I would guess that the pain you've been grieving, but really haven't had the opportunity to mourn.
Now, you know, when you talk about being put on antidepressants and it hasn't taken away your grief, antidepressants are not going to take away your grief. You're going to go through the grieving process. I have had some people that I have a compassionate friends group, and I had a couple of people come in who had been taking Valium and antidepressants and whatever, and they were talking about the fact that they couldn't cry with the group. Everybody else is crying, and they're talking about the fact that they can't cry, and I thought, geez, you know, if what you're taking is causing you not to be able to cry after 6 months, you know, you ought to think about maybe working with somebody not to take it. But again, we had, I think it was Terry that said that she was taking antidepressants years before her mother died. She had some depression. So, you know, we don't know your history. And if you've had serious depression before a loss, you probably need to get some help and look at it. But if you haven't ever had any depression and you're put on antidepressants, particularly if you're put on it by a person who you're not having counseling, like Howard said, the general practitioners, I've heard of several of them that just put people on antidepressants, and it's kind of a crazy thing. David Daniels, who's a psychiatrist at Stanford, a good friend, his mother was 90 years old when his father died, and they put her on antidepressants, and his doctor, and he was horrified, you know, that would happen. So, you know, you really need to take a look at that. Okay, we've got another question we've got to move on to here. We could go on with this one, but what is complicated grief?
Well, that's a very difficult one, and I wanted to just check with you before we get into this, Gloria, because I see we've passed our time. Can we continue talking, or do we need to end the webinar
now? We can keep going. If people want to sign off, they can sign off, since we're getting into questions. Do we want to go to the next slide? Let's go to the next slide, and then we'll keep taking questions, and then people can sign off that want to end. How's that?
Well, I want to get to that question about complicated grief, because this is
if they want to stay on and have it. Let's go to this, and then we'll go to the questions.
All right, so if you look at this, these are the other two areas besides emotional and physical, cognitive and spiritual. In terms of our thoughts, you know, we have disbelief or denial, confusion. We seem to be preoccupied. Some of us also have reported having a sense of presence. I'm sure some of you have had the feeling that your loved one was just around. forgetfulness, difficulty concentrating. And I have difficulty with that one because, let me ask you a question, and think about this for all of you who are listening. How many of you have been in your kitchen, have walked into your bedroom and got there and scratched your head and said, I know I came in here for a reason. I think we have difficulty sometimes concentrating during normal times. When we're experiencing grief, it's even harder. Repetition of events. And then spiritual, as I was saying, there's a loss of faith and belief systems for many, and others tend to question their faith and belief. Regarding that last one, I always say allow people to be where they are. If people have had a belief system and are allowed to experience their frustration or anger, once they've worked through that, they'll come back to it. However, if we don't allow it to occur, they will lose their strength and belief system and their support network through the church or their synagogues or wherever they believe completely, and it will be another loss for them to deal with.
Absolutely. And we're going to have, next month we're going to have Dennis Apple on, who's a pastor, who's going to talk a little bit about loss of faith in God. So you want to move to the next slide, Heather? And while she's doing that, Howard, I'm going to take another question here. Oh, you want to do the complicated grief? Yeah. Okay. Let's finish up, and then we'll take your complicated grief.
Okay. As a way of ending, just remember these 4 points. Grief touches all lives. Grief is a normal human experience. Grieving persons are experiencing a situational crisis which impacts their lives in all its dimensions. And the last thing that both Heidi and Gloria said very clearly, know that you're not alone.